It was almost Christmas. A full passenger jet was flying through the night sky over Colombia. Inside the cabin, families were thinking about home. But inside the cockpit, one small mistake was about to send the aircraft straight toward a mountain. This is the story of American Airlines Flight 965, a flight that should have ended safely, but instead became one of the deadliest navigation errors in aviation history. Let's find out what happened. On December 20th, 1995, Flight 965 left Miami in USA, flying to Cali in Colombia. On board, there were 155 passengers and 8 crew members. Most were Colombian families returning home for Christmas. The aircraft was a Boeing 757, a modern and a reliable jet, always flown to Cali, US many times before. The captain was actually the number is 13 more times. The first officer was 39 years old and also experienced. Both pilots were well trained. They had flown international routes for years. Nothing about this crew suggested danger. Nothing about this aircraft suggested danger. And nothing about this flight suggested it would not arrive. There was delay when the plane was about to leave Miami. Bad weather in the United States delayed connecting flights. Many passengers arrived late. The plane waited at the gate, and finally, after almost 2 hours, at around 6:35 p.m., the plane left Miami. The plane flew and reached the cruising point at about 36,000 feet. For several hours, the flight was smooth and quiet. No turbulence, no technical problems, just another routine international flight. Cali Airport sits inside a valley. Tall mountains rise on both sides. If a plane goes off course, it can hit terrain very quickly. In 1995, Cali Airport had no radar, no way for controllers to see aircraft positions, no modern terrain alert system. Controllers gave instruction using radio only. So this is what was happening in Cali. They were only giving instructions through radios. Pilots had to follow special arrival paths to avoid the mountains. The normal arrival path was called the Rosso 1 arrival. It passed over 2 important navigation points. Yes, baby. And these navigation points was called Tulua and Rosso. If pilots followed this route correctly, they stayed safe. If they left it, they were in danger. At around 7 in the morning, as Flight 965 approached Colombia, the pilot asked for descent. Actually, the flight is about 3 hours, so if it left at around 6 p.m., it will have been there at around 9 p.m. They planned to land on runway 01. This runway had an instrument landing system. It is an automatic where it can land the system without you people engaging anything. Then the air traffic control asked a simple question. Can you land on runway 19 instead? Runway 19 was the opposite direction. It had no landing guidance system. It required more work and more attention. The pilot accepted the change almost immediately. So you see, when you are doing something on your own, there are a lot of risks that are involved. And when you had prepared your mind that you will be using one thing at a time, it would have been very difficult for them to figure out and make this plane land on a safe place. The captains began entering waypoints into the flight computer. He typed in Rosso, but the computer had more than one Rosso in its database. One was near Cali, and one was far away near Bogota. The screen showed a list, and the captain selected the first one. It was the wrong one. Actually, the one away in Bogota. The autopilot turned the aircraft sharply left towards the mountains, and the crew did not notice. The aeroplane was now turning left, but the pilots did not notice right away. They were busy entering data into their systems because automatically, uh, if you have now changed your route, you have to put in the key data, you have to put on the raw data into the computer so that at least you navigate yourself and see if you will land this plane properly. Because at the speed in which the aeroplane is coming to land is always really high, because the nose is now facing down, and therefore when the nose is facing down, the speed must increase. We call it gliding to the destination. It had disappeared from the flight computer. The first officer said something was wrong. The captain tried to fix it. They said go direct to Tulua. But the other one said no, go direct to Rosso. They were unsure which waypoint to use, where they really were, which direction they were flying, but the plane kept descending. Of course, when the plane is about to arrive its destination, you have to now begin to leave the high altitudes and you come to lower altitude so that you navigate your points well and see the landing places and the traffic, the runway properly, so that you can land on it. They depended only on the flight computer, their instruments, the radio, but now the computer had the wrong information. The airplane was no longer following the safe arrival path. It was flying straight towards the mountains around Bogota. The pilots did not realize this. They believed they were still above safe ground. They never said, let's stop the descent, let's climb, let's check where we are. Instead, they kept trying to fix the computer. Their attention was inside the cockpit, not outside the aeroplane. Remember, they never noticed that the plane would have crashed. And maybe their mind wasn't that if they're descending, the plane is about to crash. They were just focusing on looking for where Rosso was. The plane was descending, moving fast, getting closer to the terrain. The controller thought the plane was on the correct route. The controller had no radar. He could not see the danger. The pilots trusted the instruction. They trusted the computer, but both were wrong. The mountains were now directly ahead. Only seconds remained. Remember, this time, our pilots are still focused on the computer. They have not seen if there is any danger. They have not even watched the windows to see if there is something that might be alarming. Suddenly, a loud voice filled the cockpit. Terrain, terrain, pull up. This was the first time the system warned them. The pilot reacted instantly. The first officer pulled the control column back hard. The captain pushed the engines to full power. Pushing the engines full power. They always push to full power while someone is pushing this other way. The aeroplane began to climb, but something was wrong. The speed brakes were still extended. Speed brakes slow the aircraft. They are used during descent, but they also reduce lift, reduce climb ability. The pilots forgot to retract them. At that time, their training did not include retracting speed brakes during this warning. The plane was trying to climb, but it was too heavy and too slow because of the brakes that were not retracted. Once the plane has begun to descend, the brakes are always applied. So when you want to climb again, you have to retract the brakes. The nose of the airplane pointed upward. The engines roared. Trees appeared out of the clouds, then rocks. There was no more time. The aircraft struck a mountain near El Divo, Colombia. It hit at high speed. The plane broke apart instantly. The crash happened just seconds after the warning. There was no time to maneuver ways because the speed brakes were not retracted back. 163 people on board lost their lives. 159 were killed and about 4 survived. And it is also said that one dog was on the plane and the dog survived. They were badly injured but alive. They spent the night in the cold jungle. And then in the next morning, the rescue teams reached those mountains. The wreckage was spread across the mountainside. There was no fire, there was no explosion, just silence. And that alone really helped them because if the plane would have exploded, there would be no one that would have survived. Everyone would have crashed. And just because the plane didn't light on fire, that one really helped them. And of course, the investigators must always do their investigation. And there are always two materials in the cockpit that are always being looked for when a plane crashes. Number one, in the cockpit, there is always a voice recorder. This one, they always work hard to find it in all ways possible. And then there is always a flight data recorder. It is what always listens to the flight data recorder. It records all the things that were input during the time that the pilots were flying this plane. So when they take these things, they go and look at the data. They remove the data from them, from the voice recorder, and then from the data recorder so that they can do their investigation. So investigators found that the crash was caused by a chain of small mistakes. First, the runway change. The pilots planned for runway 01. Then they were told to use runway 19. They accepted it too quickly. They did not fully prepare. They did not brief themselves about the new approach. They did not load it properly into the computer. So that one would have caused some errors. When the captain typed Rosso, the computer showed more than one option. He selected the first one. It was the wrong Rosso going towards the Bogota on the hillside because of the sharp left that the autopilot took. That single click sent the plane into the wrong direction. Third, loss of awareness. The pilots did not know where they were, which way they were flying. They focused on the computer instead of aircraft's path. Fourth, high workload. They were close to the airport, descending, changing plans, fixing navigations, taking to the controllers too many tasks, too little time, and fifth, the warning came too late. The terrain system only warned them seconds before impact. And finally, the speed brakes. They were still extended. They didn't retract them back. This reduced the climb performance. The plane tried to climb, but could not climb fast enough. At least if they would have retracted the brakes, the plane would have climbed that fast and they would have managed to maneuver ways. At least we just believe they would have made their way. So that is the story of airline flight 965